Underway, Brexit in the Supreme Court, the most significant case in British history. The 11 justices will decide if Parliament or government alone can fire the starting gun for the UK's exit from the EU. Protesters and appellants on both sides were offered protection.
We've made this order largely because various individuals have received threats of serious violence and unpleasant abuse.
Also this lunchtime, Italian turmoil. The PM resigns over their constitutional referendum, raising speculation over the country's membership of the Eurozone. Abused footballers form a new pressure group to protect the victims and encourage whistleblowers. And the conservationist paraglides from Siberia to Dover to support an endangered species of swan.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Alistair Stewart.
Good afternoon. With no wigs and no gilded gowns, the justices listened to and frequently challenged the government's argument that ministers alone should decide when the UK leaves the European Union. It's an appeal against the High Court's decision that Parliament should have its say. For the government, the Attorney-General said Parliament could look after itself without the intervention of the courts. Treaties were the prerogative of government, he said, and government must be free to govern. Our political correspondent Libby Vina reports.
A court case like no other. While a mass demonstration by Leave campaigners failed to materialise, Remain supporters did come out to back the judges, vilified by some in the press who must now decide who can trigger Article 50. It was the treatment of this woman, Gina Miller, who's received death threats for bringing the original case, which appeared to be of most concern to the President of the Supreme Court.
Various individuals have received threats of serious violence and unpleasant abuse in emails and other electronic communications. Threatening and abusing people because they are exercising their fundamental right to go to court undermines the rule of law.
But what of those headlines about the High Court judges who last month decided against the government? We'll take no notice, suggested Lord Neuberger.
The Registrar has asked all the parties involved in these proceedings whether they wish to ask any of the justices to stand down. All parties to the appeal have stated that they have no objection to any of us sitting on this appeal.
The Supreme Court is deciding whether the government can use its executive powers under the royal prerogative to trigger Article 50, or if Parliament has a right to vote on starting the process, and whether it also needs the Scottish Government's approval. Today, the Attorney-General argued that Parliament had already had a say on the referendum.
So, my Lords, the triggering of Article 50, we say, will not be an exercise of prerogative power on a whim or out of a clear blue sky. It is the logical conclusion of a process in which Parliament has been fully and consciously involved.
But Tory MPs remain deeply divided over the case.
I hope that 11 judges sit there and recognise the territory that they're sitting in right now, which is constitutionally very grave indeed. And I hope that they reflect on the fact that, this is not their business.
One of the reasons that many of those people voted to leave was for the supremacy of that place over there, Parliament. And when people come to this place, the Supreme Court, to argue precisely in favour of the sovereignty of Parliament, they have abuse and misinformation hurled at them. It's about time we have a proper debate about this.
The judges have made it clear that they'll decide whether that debate is in Parliament or not.
Libby, how important is it to the Prime Minister that she wins this case?
Well, she clearly thinks it's very important. I have to say many people at Westminster have been puzzled as to why the government has pursued this case all the way to the Supreme Court. After all, most MPs voted for there to be a referendum back in June, and most have said publicly that they would vote to trigger Article 50. They wouldn't frustrate the will of the people. But the Prime Minister's spokesman today made it clear that there are fears in government that that could happen, that this could get bogged down in Parliament, and that Mrs May wants to show that she does have the right per se to trigger this article on her own. I have to say that even if she does win here, I think it could be something of a Pyrrhic victory. The fact is, it could be interpreted as being seen to try and suppress debate. Now, why does that matter? Well, it has some resonance in the fact that the government has been so secretive nearly 6 months after that vote to leave the European Union. We know very little indeed about what sort of future Mrs May wants to see, what sort of future relationship she wants to see between Britain and the European Union. I think the fact is, if she does win here and doesn't consult Parliament, that will reinforce those fears.
Libby, thank you. Italians are looking at an uncertain future today after their Prime Minister quit in the wake of a crushing referendum defeat. Matteo Renzi had been trying to push through constitutional reform but couldn't convince 60% of his country to vote through the plans. His resignation has left the country in political turmoil and is another blow to the European Union, already reeling from the Brexit fallout, with Italy's membership of the Eurozone now in play. Paul Davis reports.
In this year of rejecting the establishment, this time it was Italy's turn. Bella Ciao, goodbye, celebrating supporters of the No campaign are singing. It's a sarcastic rather than a fond farewell. Their target, Italy's Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, who called a referendum on a package of reforms and saw it turned into a vote of no confidence in him and the establishment.
Non siamo stati convincenti, mi dispiace.
We have not been convincing, I am sorry. He then told the nation he'd be keeping his promise to resign following a crushing defeat. Early indications show almost 60% of voters supported the No campaign. Renzi gambled and lost spectacularly. It means Italy woke up this morning to an uncertain future. Dissatisfaction over the economy, the EU and illegal immigration accounting for a once popular Prime Minister. The value of the euro tumbled initially, but analysts say it's too early to suggest that Italy will follow Britain out of the EU.
So certainly Europe is worse off today, even though I think that all the talks about Italexit or the end of Europe are really way to exaggerate.
Matteo Renzi, at 39, was Italy's youngest Prime Minister. His departure opens the door to protest and anti-Euro parties vying for power in future elections. Paul Davis, ITV News.
Our Europe editor James Mates is in Rome and he's been explaining how significant last night's vote could prove to be.
There's been no great turmoil in the markets here, largely because this result was expected, unlike the Brexit and Trump votes, which pretty much came out of the blue. And from an Italian point of view, muddling through, governments falling, that's pretty much a default position for them. But from the point of view of Europe, it's a disaster. They badly needed a strong Italian government with the new powers coming out of this constitutional referendum to reform the Italian economy, to put Italian banks back on their feet, and to join the effort to sort out the Eurozone. Now they have no such government, and it's possible that in a general election next year or the year after, the government here could be a great deal more Eurosceptic, which all leaves Angela Merkel pretty much on her own. President Hollande is standing down, Renzi's gone, the British are on the way out. And this coming into a period in which they hardly dare ask the people anything, because anything that mainstream politicians are recommending is being roundly rejected. And this coming up to a year 2017 in which there are at least 3 major general elections coming up.
Our Europe editor James Mates reporting there from Rome. Now, it's 2.5 weeks since Andy Woodward became the first former footballer to speak out about the sexual abuse that he suffered as a young footballer at Crewe Alexandra. Since then, shocking allegations of abuse across the country have been coming thick and fast. This lunchtime, 3 of the players who first broke their silence have formed a new organisation called the Offside Trust to help other potential victims. And these are the latest developments. 2 former players have claimed that they were abused at Southampton in the 1980s. Their coach, Bob Higgins, was sacked by the club, but wasn't police checked before being offered another job in football. Chelsea apologised to Gary Johnson over the abuse that he suffered at the hands of Chief Scout Eddie Heath. And a hotline run by the NSPCC dedicated to abuse in football has now received nearly 900 calls. Well, our correspondent Peter Smith is at today's launch of the Offside Trust in Manchester. Peter, what exactly does it hope to achieve?
Well, Alistair, as you've just said there are more and more people coming forward to report historical abuse in football. There's more and more information about those who were abusing, but something that is perhaps getting lost in all of this is the damage done to those who suffered at the hands of their abusers. And that's why Andy Woodward, one of the first to speak out about this, came here today with the conference for the Offside Trust. It's an organisation that wants to encourage people to come forward who have been abused, to feel safe, a place where they can talk about it, and they will be given the help that they need. And I'm joined now by Andy Woodward. Andy, if you can just tell me a bit, what did it take for you and the other players to come here today and speak out?
Yeah, it's, we've been talking the last couple of days. It's all happened really quick, but the key thing is that we're all in unity. We're all one big family, and we wanted to set something up, and that's why we've set this Offside Trust up to help people, to reach out to people. It's early days at the moment.
There is suffering beyond what people would imagine. It's not just about the initial abuse. These are scars that live with you for years.
Yeah, they've lived with me for 30 years, There isn't words for the pain that we all go through, and that's not just in football, us as human beings, that have suffered this abuse. I can't put it into words, and this is why we just want to move forward with the trust and just reach out and help people.
Relationships are something that often suffer. Those who have survived abuse say that trusting again is difficult. You've been joined here today by your partner, Zelda. Zelda, tell me about what do you see in Andy and how he suffered and how brave he is now to speak out?
Oh, I'm incredibly proud of Andy. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, Andy suffers with anxiety, he suffers with panic attacks, he has flashbacks, he doesn't sleep very well, he can wake up in the middle of the night having nightmares. It has an enormous effect on his life, and
it impacts the family.
It does impact the family, yes. And meeting the other players and the other partners and wives, they've all been suffering with the same symptoms, and they all just really need to join together and get some support and get some help.
Andy, that's something you would second?
Absolutely, yeah. It does impact on not only, my relationship now with Zelda, but my previous relationships and, my children who, they've suffered not having the proper dad that they should have, and now I'm going to be able to do that now. I'm going to be able to be that dad to my children, and that's what it is.
That's an important message. Thank you very much, Andy, for speaking out. And as the message here today was, if there is anyone who wants to speak out, the Offside Trust is now there to help give the support that players will need.
Peter, Andy and Zelda, thank you all very much. Still to come, Trump angrily takes on targets at home and abroad. And the conservationist who has taken to the air in an attempt to save her favourite swans. But first, a warning. Britain is becoming more divided as it becomes more diverse. That's according to a report published today into Social Integration, which also warns there are growing problems with ethnic segregation. The report's author, Dame Louise Casey, has made a raft of recommendations which include an oath of integration for all of those seeking public office. Sally Biddulph has more details.
Multi-faith and multicultural. Different communities live side by side in modern Britain, like this predominantly Asian area in Birmingham. Yet here, like in many other areas, segregation and isolation are also present. Now, a major government review says things need to change.
The pace of population change in the country in some areas has just been too much for the general public overall. And without a really strong integration strategy with things like English language, mixing opportunities for all young people, I think we've got ourselves into difficulties that we now need to make sure we get ourselves out of.
In Blackburn, they recognised the issue 10 years ago and have been working to improve it.
There's interfaith events, there's mosque events, there's each of the communities working together. We do understand that there are issues, with regards to communities living together, communities living in their own areas, but people feel happy in their own areas.
Today's review makes a number of recommendations, including classes on British values in schools for all children, more activities for young people to mix together, such as sport, and English classes for isolated groups, especially women who stay at home. Reaching that last group is hard. ITV News exclusively accompanied the report author as she visited the Adara Women's Network in Birmingham.
I was overwhelmed with the amount of women coming to us with anxiety, depression, isolation, baggage of issues.
Here they offer language classes to women from ethnic backgrounds. It can make a real difference, but it's only a start. Integration is complicated, encompassing culture, family and society, which this review highlights. Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
And our national editor, Allegra Stratton, who you saw in that report, is with me live now. As we just saw, you spent a lot of time with Louise Casey. How delicate has this whole question been for her?
It's incredibly sensitive because her report, she spent 18 months going around the country, but unlike all the reports that have come before, she has decided to focus in on the Muslim community. She's already received criticism for it today, but she believes it is the heart of the issue across the country. Now, she took us to Sparkle in Birmingham. She took us there. She decided of all of these places she's visited, somewhere like that was important because it's 75% Muslim. Now, the place you saw us in earlier was a women's education centre. We met with Louise Casey, about 16 women, most of whom were Yemeni, none of whom had a job, most of whom, I know because I spoke to them, couldn't speak any English. The heartening thing was that I said, "Do you feel British?" Immediately, they all murmured and said, "Yes, we do." But we also heard stories of a woman who wasn't allowed to go to college because her husband didn't want her to, and of women not being allowed out of the house without a male escort. So the reason it's sensitive is that Louise Casey's doing this report about the country, but she has decided, and she's said that she's done this on purpose, the most important thing to focus on is the Muslim community.
The other most important thing is whether she's got the Prime Minister's ear.
I think she does. She's incredibly highly regarded across the political spectrum. I think the integration oath and the use of schools to boost integration, I think that she'll probably find a Theresa May government responds and does something on that. I think elsewhere, on resources and money for English language, I think they'll struggle on that front.
Allegra, thank you. A British woman has been stabbed to death in Lapland. The 25-year-old, who's understood to be from Scotland, had reportedly been working at a Christmas holiday resort. Finnish police arrested a man at the scene. And a student has died during an annual university ski trip in France, named by friends and family as Matt Smith. The undergraduate from Oxford University was found in his vacation accommodation in Val Thorens resort in the Alps. In the United States, Donald Trump's taken a swipe at China after they made an official complaint about the president-elect. Chinese were upset that he'd taken a controversial phone call from Taiwan's president that upended decades of diplomatic protocol. He was upset with their response and said so on social media. As Nick Wallace reports, it's not the only issue to anger Mr. Trump.
We pledge allegiance to one flag.
Currently on a victory tour of the United States, when Donald Trump's not whipping up the crowds at the podium, he's making waves on social media. The president-elect's latest pair of tweets lay into China's monetary policy and military ambitions. Did China ask us if it was okay to devalue their currency, he asks, heavily tax our products going into their country, or to build a massive military complex in the middle of the South China Sea? I don't think so.
Mr. President-elect, do you regret your phone conversation with Taiwan's president?
This baiting of China comes after Mr. Trump took a congratulatory phone call from the president of Taiwan, which China regards as a rogue province. Over the weekend, the Chinese Foreign Ministry issued a veiled warning.
The China-US economic and trade relationship has always been highly mutually beneficial. If it is to continue, it needs both sides to make joint efforts based on adherence to important principles of bilateral relations.
I thought I told you to turn off your phone.
Donald Trump's fondness for social media has already been noted and lampooned by American TV shows. This is Saturday Night Live's take on the president-elect's behaviour before he sent those tweets about China.
And I just retweeted the best tweet. I mean, wow, what a great, smart tweet.
Mr. Trump, we're in a security briefing.
Predictably, the president-elect has already made his feelings known about that sketch on Twitter, calling it unwatchable, biased and sad.
Another great retweet.
China's thoughts on Mr. Trump's latest Twitter salvo has not yet been reported. Nick Wallace, ITV News.
And finally, a woman from Gloucestershire has become so concerned about the declining number of swans, she has taken to the air in protest. Sasha Dench has spent 10 weeks paragliding the 4,500-mile journey from the Siberian tundra to recreate the migration route of the Buick swan. Well, today she touched down in Britain, and Richard Pallow was in Dover as she arrived. Over to you, Richard.
Well, Alistair, when most of us want to see a swan, we pop down the local canal, lake or pond. Not this lady. She has flown for 10 weeks above Northern Europe in some of freezing temperatures, all to look at the swans and their migration patterns. What did they make of you in this?
Well, the swans, to be honest, they were completely fine with me in the air. They didn't see me as anything they recognised before, just potentially a big thing to fly with. So I've been able to fly up underneath flocks of swans flying in V formations, but I've also had birds come up and fly at my wingtips just to see if I was worth flying with in a V formation. So that was really, really special.
And what has your trip taught you about the decline? Because numbers have gone down by almost a half in approximately 20 years.
They have, and at WWT Slimbridge we have been tracking the birds for several years now with GPS collars. But what I was able to do on this trip was to add more information to those data points. So, for example, I could see the areas that we knew they were using, why they're using it, how many swans are there, what are they doing when they're there, what's the state of that particular wetland, could there be a problem there? So that, and also speak to a lot of people along the flyway to figure out for example, where the illegal hunting is happening. We know that a lot of them are being shot because a third of them have got shot in their tissues. We just didn't know where it was happening. So I've been able to find out all that kind of thing as well.
Well, very important work that you've done. Her trip hasn't quite finished yet. She's now got to fly back home to Gloucestershire.
To Gloucestershire, back to Slimbridge.
So a couple of 100 miles still to go, but I guess after 4,500 it's not that much.
Richard, thank you very much indeed, and Sasha. That is it this lunchtime. Mary Nightingale and Mark Austin will be here with the ITV Evening News at 6:30. The news where you are follows the national weather. But for now, from all of us, bye-bye and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.